Only mode.
Got it.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Ashley Woolham. I'm the coordinator of Member Services and Marketing for the International Leadership Association, and this is the February installment of the Leadership Perspectives webinar series. Thank you for joining us today with this webinar session with Dave Ulrich, a professor in the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan and also a partner at the RBL Group. Before we start, please note the following. This webinar will be archived. If you missed something, would like to hear the webinar again, or would like to see the presentation again, they will be published to the ILA website within 24 hours. You will receive an email with instructions for accessing the archived recording after the webinar has ended. Second, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. At any time, you may ask questions by typing them into the questions box of your webinar control panel, which is currently displayed on the right-hand side of your screen. We will address your questions during the second half of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. As mentioned, Dave is a professor and also a partner at the RBL Group, which is a consulting firm focused on helping organizations and leadership deliver value. Dave and RBL have consulted and performed research with over half of the Fortune 200 firms. He has published over 175 articles and book chapters in 23 books, including Asian Leadership, The Why of Work, HR Transformation, Leadership Code, and Leadership Brand. There's much more to say, but I'll let you read additional details online so we can let Dave get started. We are fortunate to have Dave with us today to speak on leadership for the future, how to be a better leader and build effective leadership. Each of these components, leadership for the future, becoming better leaders, and building effective leadership, are critical component of our work as scholars, educators, practitioners, and consultants. So I'm certain this information will be will be beneficial to all of us. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dave.
Ashley, thanks so much. And everybody on the call, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. It's the Truman Show Live. I am delighted to spend some time with you and have the opportunity to go through some materials that I hope will help make sense to you as leaders and to those who study leadership and those who practice leadership. I always have three goals for my workshops. One is to think, to get some ideas around leadership and talent, to behave, to know what to do, and then finally to have a good experience. As Ashley said, we've written a lot of books. Today we're going to focus a little bit more on leadership code and the leadership row around leadership brand and leadership code and kind of what's new in leadership thinking. And that's where our focus will be today. The most recent book is The Why of Work. We hope that kind of pushes leadership the next step in how leaders become meaning makers, and I'll weave some of that in today. Today, in the 30 or 35 minutes we have, I want to answer four questions quite quickly. One, why does leadership matter? And talk about the importance of leadership, which almost everybody on the phone can agree with, and we could probably stipulate it. Second, to answer the impossible, what's new in leadership? And there's lots of ideas on this, but how do we think about new stuff? Third, how do we build the leadership code? How do we begin to build the core factors of good leaders? And four, how do we build what we call the leadership brand or the differentiators so that our leadership becomes unique and branded? And five, what can I then do to be a better leader? We're going to walk through this pretty quickly. I give you a caveat in advance. This is more material than deserves 35 minutes, so this is going to be content rich, and I hope if you want more information, we'll have ways for you to get access to it. If I were to start by asking you a simple question, if we have better leadership, what's going to happen? Well, that question is asked by a lot of people. Our suggestion is leadership increases 5 stakeholders. One, employees will be more productive. We think leaders, because you have a good leader in a company, the employees will produce more. And we even have a formula for productivity in our quest for simplicity. And I had to just give you a warning. In my PhD eons ago, decades ago, 25, 30 years ago, I was a numerical taxonomist. Now, some of the academics on the line will start laughing because they know what that is. It's not taxidermy of stuffing animals. Taxonomy is finding order in chaos and finding simplicity in complexity. What I'm going to do today is 4 or 5 times oversimplify a complex world. And here's the first one. Productivity is competent employees who are committed and who find meaning. And we think that formula drives productivity, and that's what leaders do, especially this new third one, which we'll talk about, which is the why of work. Leaders also help line managers execute their strategy. These two factors below this line are leadership inside a company, both with the employees and with the organization. But outside, leaders also have an impact on customer share. We know particularly that more committed employees will drive more committed customers. Leaders also have an impact on investors. We know that about 50% of a company's stock value is tied to what's called the intangibles, or the perception of the quality of earnings, and that comes from leadership. And we know that leaders drive your reputation in the community. Net, net. If we have better leadership, good things will happen. We could add to this list regulators and suppliers, but leadership makes a difference. And leadership is one of those things that's important. This slide just captures the importance of investors that we're just now, in fact, sending surveys out, and if anybody has professional investors, we'd love to get a hold of them. In the investment community, 30 to 40% of investment decisions are likely to come because of the industry, 30 to 40% because of the firm, and 20 to 30% because investors have implicit and hopefully explicit confidence in leadership. So question one, why does leadership matter? Leadership adds value to stakeholders both inside and outside the company. So number two, what's new in leadership? If you were to Google the word leader, we've done that, you get somewhere between 300 and 350 million hits. On the phone, I know with the ILA or professors and scholars of leadership, we have created an enormous amount of rhetoric, and I've been guilty of some of that as well. We know there's an enormous amount out there. We're going to be so bold as to say there's two trends that seem to emerge as we look forward. One is the shift from leader to leadership. A lot of what's out there is the study of the individual as a leader. Do you have emotional intelligence? Do you have a vision? Do you serve others? Do you live your values? Do you have authenticity? Leadership is building the next generation and building deeper within a company who's going to be providing the success for the future. We think a lot of the studies to date have been about building good leaders, and that matters a lot. We think ultimately leadership matters more. And the ultimate test of leadership is not what I do as a leader, but what happens after I'm gone or when I'm not in attendance. And the trend is to say, how do we build leadership collectively, not just individual leaders? Second, inside to outside. Very often the focus on leadership is inside. Who am I? What do I do? What do I want? What are my values? We think ultimately the test of leadership is the value we create for somebody else. Inside is about my values. Outside is about the values that I create for others. Both of those are critical. Both of those are critical. But when we put them together, we can begin to see an impact. Here's an example of leader versus leadership. This company on the left, if you could go back 30 years and relive, even though these people are obviously dressed for their decade and look kind of scary, this is Microsoft. The company on the right is obviously Apple with Steve Jobs. What's really interesting is to go back about 15 years to see, look at what happens to Apple stock here and what happens here. In the first case, Steve Jobs was there was a rumor that he was ill, and their stock dropped somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%, 40%. He wasn't ill, the stock came back. He did get ill and had to leave for a period of time, and the stock dropped again. In this 6-month period of time, what I've been told by those who know, Apple board of directors said, we had a good leader, Steve Jobs, we needed to build leadership. And now they believe that their stock has gone up, not just because of products and services, but because of leadership. If we follow this out, the last 2 months in 2011, when Steve Jobs resigned again because of health reasons, the stock dropped a small amount and has continued to rise. It is they've built in Apple leadership, not just leaders. At the same time, Microsoft, in a tough economy, stocks held stable. When Bill Gates left, they had leadership, not just the leader. Inside versus outside. I love this commercial. This is an advertisement from a law firm, was his, says that their focus is not on who they are, but how they benefit others. Obviously, this is women going through divorce. When we put those together, we come up with two dimensions of leadership, leader to leadership, inside to outside. At the bottom left, we have competent leaders, individuals who do their job well. At the top left, we have celebrity leaders, outside individuals who are known as great leaders. At the bottom right, we have great leadership systems inside the company. We believe all of these combine to create what we call the leadership brand. The brand metaphor is a marvelous metaphor because a brand says there are some things you need that are basic. If I have a branded shirt or pen or car, there are some things every shirt, pen, or car does, but there are also some differentiators. In our research, we tried to sort out what makes a leadership brand happen. What % of leadership is basically the same stuff, what we call the code, and what are some common rules that everybody should follow? When we, and the academics in the room are now going to cringe, we struggled how to do that research. What % of leadership is the same basic stuff? What % is different? We decided to do what's called a meta qualitative analysis. Now again, the academics will go, what is he talking about? We identified about 15 people who have been experts in leadership. And they've collectively published over 100 books, done over 2.5, 3 million leadership 360s. They are deep experts in leadership. We went to them and said, what % of successful leadership is basically the same stuff? The leadership code. So it's a meta-analysis of these thought leaders. Their answer to us was 60 to 70%. 60 to 70% of leadership is the same basic stuff. 30 to 40% has to vary by the expectations those leaders face. It's fun. When we went into the brand literature, we found the same thing. If you drive a Toyota and somebody else drives a Ford, 60 to 70% of that car is basically the same. 30 to 40% is different. And so the brand metaphor begins to suggest what's the same and what's different. Question 1, leadership makes a difference. Question 2, what's new in leadership? Two basic trends, leader to leadership and inside to outside. What then is the code? What are those same basic elements that every leader's got to have? Now here we, back to my taxonomy background, we went through as much of that literature as we could fathom and tried to say, and also with our 15 thought leaders, what basic things must every leader master? If you're in a big company, small company, public agency, private agency, U.S. firm, European firm, Asian firm, what are some core dimensions of any successful leader? And we found 5. A successful leader needs to be a strategist. You need to figure out where you're going. There's lots of words for that, vision, aspiration, customer-centric, outside-focused. A leader needs to be an executor. A leader needs to get things done. A leader has to have the capacity to deliver, to get the results, to manage change, to get things done. A leader has to manage talent, kind of the short-term people side. You've got to manage the people that work with you. And we'll talk about that, what it means. And a leader has to develop the next generation, long-term people. What we discovered is almost all successful leaders need to master these 4 basic roles. Strategy, where am I going? Execution, how do I get there? Talent manager, who goes with me? And human capital developer, who stays? What we also found is that most leaders have a personal predisposition. This is that kind of born versus bred. Most leaders are more comfortable in one of those roles than others. Some leaders are very comfortable setting direction. They love working in the future and what things will be what will happen. Some leaders are very predisposed to execution. Some are very predisposed to people or coaching and nurturing the future. Our sense is that successful leadership, as you move up in the organization, needs to master all of those. And then in the middle is probably the core or the heart of leadership, personal proficiency. Am I prepared to lead? Do I have ethics, values, judgment, authenticity, emotional intelligence, integrity? What we also found is most of the work on leadership would pick one of these 5 and dig deep into it. We see great works on what it means to be a strategic leader, on what it means to execute, on what it means to work with people, a great book on talent management recently, on what it means to develop the future talent, and what it means to be authentic and have emotional intelligence. But our view simply is good leaders have to do all of those. We call that the DNA of leadership. Here's the basics that a leader must manage. Here's what that looks like. If I were to give you in 45 seconds an exercise, here's a bunch of numbers, randomly arrayed. How far can you count? Start with number 1. And as you're looking at these, I hope you're trying to count them. I'll just talk about it. It's a tough exercise because you can look around, you can find 2, you can find 3, you can find 4, and it's a little confusing. When I now put in 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, and 4, a tic-tac-toe, suddenly the exercise gets easier. A 1, a 2, a 3 in this cell, a 4, a 5, a 6, and you suddenly see a pattern, 7, 8, 9. All we've done in the leadership code is give you a pattern. We have simply said, in order to be an effective leader, these are some core things every leader must manage and master. And when leaders manage and master this, they're strategists. They have a point of view about the future. They think about customers. They create strategic traction. Leaders who are strategists know what's happening. Leaders are executors. They make things happen. They make decisions. They have accountability. Leaders are wonderful talent managers. They know how to coach and communicate. And then back to what we talked about. They build competencies. They build commitment. And we think as they go forward with the talent equation, they work very aggressively at managing meaning and purpose in the lives of their employees. And leaders develop the next generation. They empower people to develop, not just doing it themselves. They help people look at their careers. They map their workforce, and they systematically develop talent. Leaders who master these skills will do the basics of leadership. They have the leadership code and personal proficiency. They maintain their personal passion and drive by doing the things they need to do. They manage themselves physically, intellectually. They have learning agility, what the Bob Eichinger and his colleagues have identified as so critical. They have emotional reserves, emotional intelligence. They have great social skills and social network. Their social IQ is strong. And they have a strong moral code, and they're authentic. This framework has an implication. If you are charged with leadership within a company, look at your competency model. Because in fact, we did studies with the Hewitt Group and Fortune Magazine called Top Companies for Leadership. We looked at about 450 companies. Over 95% of those companies have a competency model. It's no longer enough to have one. You've got one. We know what our competencies are. Match your model. We were in a company recently. They had 10 competencies. 7 of the 10 were around execution. They had a competency model that was flawed. It's like having a car with 3 wheels. We believe that leadership needs to manage all 5. Another company had 8 of their 10 competencies in personal proficiency. We think good competency models have to capture all 5 of these dimensions. This is the DNA code. This is a very arrogant thing to say, and we hesitate to say it. We say it with great caution, but every time we go out in the last 2 years since we wrote the book Leadership Code and talk to leadership groups, we say, what's missing? And almost everything we can see that a leader has to know and do is in this code. It's the basics. Now I'm going to blitz through. These are the details of the code that were on that last slide. What does a strategist need to know? They need to know the future. They need to work with clients. They need to have strategic traction. They need to tell stories. This is a good example of bad strategy. You can't be all things to all people. What does an executor need to do? They need to manage their technical skills. They need to build teams, get decisions made, manage accountability, and make change happen. What does a talent manager need to do? They coach, they communicate. That's new. It's not command and control. How do they do that? Around competencies, around commitment, and around contribution and meaning. This is a great example of the talent manager of the future and how they have to manage talent. The hands represent the client. The child represents the leader being pulled by the client. the staff functions, human resources, IT, finance, support systems, and the consultant is the dog standing who makes sure that it all works, or the academic standing. Human capital developers, as I said, they empower others, they manage careers, help people look at what their career looks like. They build an employee brand of what the brand is for the employees. They map their workforce and link those key people to positions, and they have a systemic way to review talent. And then, as we said, personal proficiency at the heart. They have a personal brand or identity. They take care of themselves physically, their physical energy, diet, exercise. They have learning agility, emotional energy, social networks, and a strong spiritual or ethical foundation. That's it. That's the leadership code. And that's what we think is central to leadership going forward. Where are we going? How do we get there? Who goes with me? Who stays when I go? And am I trusted to be a leader? And we can rate people against that as a group or as a person. The leadership code has 5 elements. Now we come to what we call the differentiators. What are the things that separate? As I said, the leadership code is about 60 to 70% of leadership. So what's the other 30 to 40%? What is it that makes leaders successful? And we call that the real focus of brand. Leadership code is the generic. It's the pieces everybody must do and do well. The brand are those things that distinguish us and let us be different, and how our leaders might be different from your leaders. So in leadership brand, we have the code, the things in common, and we have the differentiators. When we work with companies, we often find that they focus a lot of attention on building your code. Do you do those 5 basic things well? Because those things are absolutely critical. But ultimately, the differentiator, the brand that's going to distinguish why you pay more for a car, a shirt, a pen, or some other branded object, is what makes leaders unique. We think the metaphor of a leadership brand is a terrific metaphor. It focuses us on the outside. It's not just about me as a leader and my values, albeit absolutely critical. But the value of values is whether they create value. The value of values is whether they create value. We also find, for those of us in an academic or consulting world, business leaders understand brand. It gives you a 20 to 30% premium. A number of years ago, I stayed in a brandless, no-brand hotel in Connecticut. A few weeks or months later, I went back, and it was the Hyatt. Same room, some of the same people working, same basic accoutrements. Now, they'd upgraded some. And they got 25 to 30% more per night because the Hyatt had a better brand than the no-name brand. Brand also applies across leadership. It's sustainable. It's not just a person. It's leadership. It has efficacy. If you don't live your brand, if the promises are not realized, it won't last. Here's some companies we've had the privilege of working with in the last couple of years. With each of these companies, we say, you have a product brand, you have a firm brand. What now is your leadership brand? And so you take a company like IBM. They have a series of great products. IBM as a company has a reputation today as a global enterprise. Do our leaders reflect that? You take a company like Rogers in Canada, great company with incredibly good products, building a firm brand around connection. Building now leaders whose behavior is consistent with that brand. And what's the key to a firm brand and a leadership brand? It starts from the outside. What do we as a company want to be known for by our key stakeholders or outside customers? What's the identity we're targeting? What do we want to be known for? That's the brand. And the fun issue that we've had lately is going into companies and saying, can we help you get clear? You may have a vision, you may have a mission, you may have a strategy, you may have an aspiration. How does all that translate into the identity you're trying to create in the marketplace? What is that identity? And to use the metaphor of brand as an integrating mechanism to that identity. Once you've got that identity clear, excuse me, that wasn't very kind. In some companies, we actually do a little exercise with the top team. We were in a company recently, and we have the top team, and it could be the team of a group, or it could be a subdivision, or it could be the enterprise. What are the top 3 things we want to be known for by our target customers? What is our brand given our mission, vision, values? We like to see the answers to that question, what are the top 3 things we want to be known for, be about 80% overlap. We want a consistent, firm message. We've been in some companies recently where that's as low as 50 or 60%. Everybody seems to want to be known for something different, but if there's not clarity here, it doesn't work. Once that's clear, do our leadership actions relate to that external image? Let me give an example. On the previous slide, some of the companies we've been in. One of the things we love to do with a company like British Airways or Campbell's or Flextronics or Goldman is go to them and say, what have you communicated to the outside marketplace? Show us your commercials. And these commercials could be print, they could be social media, they could be television, they could be radio. What's the message you're sending to the marketplace about your identity? We want to be seen as very innovative. We want to be seen as very customer-centric. We want to be seen as cost-efficient. We then say, are your leadership behaviors consistent with those expectations? That one of the keys to leadership is not just about doing the basics well, hire or talent management, staff or strategy, execution. But if we want to be known for innovation, some of the behaviors of good leadership should be tied to innovation, risk-taking, being creative, experimenting. If some of the leadership or some of the firm identity is around customer centricity, some of the leadership behaviors should be around spending time with key customers, segmenting key customers, learning from key customers what they expect. Our view is very simple. A complete view of leadership does the basics, but it also connects with the differentiators. And those differentiators start by looking at customers. Who are the customers we serve, and what are the expectations of them? Here's some examples. Walmart wants low prices. Any of us who've worked with Walmart know that their leaders are going to be driven by efficiency and cost. Lexus wants to be known for the pursuit of perfection. Any of us who've been around Lexus know that Toyota leaders at all levels are driven by continuous improvement. McKinsey wants to be the CEO's trusted advisor. Leaders of their account teams are really working to diagnose problems and provide solutions. Apple, known for design and innovation. Whatever your company is known for in its marketplace by the firm, leadership behavior should be consistent with that expectation. Boy, I've taken you through most of it. Why does leadership matter? Because it creates value inside and out. What's new in leadership? Leader to leadership, inside and outside. That leads to the leadership code, doing the basics well. It requires, though, success in the leadership brand. Beginning to create a differentiation, a unique brand of what leaders are based on customer expectations. I love now to go into companies and say, do you do the code well? And most companies do pretty well. They get 75, 80, 90% on the code. Have you really differentiated? Does your competency model reflect customer expectations? And finally, what does this mean then for the individual leader? For the last 25 years, Norm Smallwood and I have done a lot of work around building your personal point of view. And many in our field, at the end of a leadership workshop, here's what I think I want to become as a leader. And that point of view is my personal values. Here's who I am. It's what work excites me. Who are my leadership heroes and mentors? What's my life's purpose? What are my strengths? Building leadership from my strengths. What experiences have I had? And all of those go in to creating a leadership point of view. And here's what happens. That leadership point of view is consistent with my values. It's what I feel passionate about. It's on my strengths. It's past experiences. What Norm and I now want to add is a personal leadership point of view is not sufficient. That point of view should create value for somebody else. In the human resource literature today, we often talk about building on your strengths. We would now say build on your strengths that will strengthen others. And the challenge is not just to build on your strengths, but to build on strengths that will strengthen others. So the leadership point of view is not just about me, but it's now building a personal leadership brand. Who will I serve? Well, I said I'd go 35 minutes. I've gone right at 35 minutes, and I said I'd blitz you. Let me go over it again real quick, and then I know we have time for questions and some discussion. Leadership makes a difference. We could almost stipulate that, but it's very used to build the case that leadership is going to matter. What's new in leadership? Two things, leader and leadership. They both count, but let's look at leadership, not just the individual. Inside versus outside. Let's not just measure about who we are, but how who we are affects others. What does that lead to? We have to do the basics well. There are some core basic factors of leadership that are essential. Where are we going? How do we get there? Who goes with us? Who stays when we go? And most critical, in the middle, personal proficiency. What's the set of personal values and authenticity that drives us? But that's 60 to 70%. What's the other 30 to 40? How do we differentiate ourselves? How do we build a leadership brand within our company? That means taking leadership outside to the customers and the investors and showing them the value of what we're doing. And finally, what does this mean for me? In fact, we just wrote a paper that will appear pretty soon, from my personal leadership agenda to my personal leadership brand. A personal leadership agenda is who am I? A personal leadership brand is who am I, so that I can create value for those I care about. And we think that's where the brand metaphor helps us. That's the discussion I wanted to get out. That's a set of ideas that we hope is both creative as well as applicable. And let's now turn to some questions and see what questions we might have or comments.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dave. Questions from the audience will now be fielded by myself and by Susan Madsen, who is slated to moderate this webinar at the beginning, but whom we lost briefly with some technical difficulties. Susan, I take it you're there now?
Yes, I am here.
Great. Take it away.
All right. Thanks. Thanks so much, Dave. And for those listeners, if you have some other questions, please send those in, but we have a few to start. One of them is, Dave, can you comment on how this framework that you just outlined translates to an other than like business context, say in government and other kinds of organizations?
Sure. At the heart of the framework, and it's really fun to be able to play with my computer, we said there's 5 things every leader's got to do. Some of the work that we said was, let's go to a government organization. You have to, well, let's go back and frame this real well. What makes a successful or an effective leader? There's some basic things every leader's got to do, and then there's some differentiated things. So let's look at those basic things. In a public sector, that could be education, it could be an agency, state or federal level, you've got to figure out where you're going. One of the cases we have in one of our books that we use a lot is a principal who I know pretty well in Kansas City. She's a middle school principal. She works with 12 to 14-year-olds, middle school in America. Her school has a vision or mission where she's going. Second, you got to be an executor. You got to deliver on your promises. You got to make sure that things that you promise are in fact done. Third, you got to manage your people well. You got to manage your teachers as a school principal. You got to manage students. You got to manage all the people who work with you very, very well. And you've got to constantly be investing in developing your teachers for the next generation. And you have to have personal integrity. Those 5 things would apply in a high school. They'd apply in a federal agency. They'd apply in a state agency. What's interesting, we've had the real privilege of doing some work and actually quoted a book in Singapore, 2 books that we've done on leadership in Asia, sponsored by Ministry of Manpower. And what we find is these same 5 factors apply in government agencies in Asia. We've also been doing some work in different countries in the world. In the next few weeks, I'll have the privilege of being in Estonia. I'll have the privilege of being in Zimbabwe. And we're saying these are the basics of leadership. Now, the other thing we showed in our work was that that's 60 to 70% of leadership. 30 to 40% is, so what's unique about my situation? And we often start that, we call that the differentiators. The school principal I talk about, her name is Belinda Woodson. What is unique? We have asked her to do that exercise. In this school, in Independence, Missouri, what do we want to be known for by our students, by the parents, by the administrators? And some of the things she came up with were around safety, that students will have a safe experience, about commitment to learning, and about creativity. And so she then worked with her teachers and other administrative staff to say, what can we do as leaders to build this culture of safety, of innovation, of creativity, and of student learning and engagement that makes sure that our school stands apart. We just published this as a case study in the School Administrator magazine, because what we found is, Belinda found that when you could build that into that education system, the school had some incredible results, and their scores went up, because the leaders in that system, that includes the administrators and teachers, did the basics well, and then they said, this is what's going to differentiate us. So, Susan, to the question, we think these ideas are pretty pervasive. Leaders must do the basics. They also have to figure out what's going to separate them and distinguish them as they go forward in both public and private sector.
Excellent. Hey, I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and these are really some quick, basic questions. Someone asked, what is your definition of leadership? And another person asked, just do a little more explanation about the difference between a leader and leadership.
Sure. I laugh a little bit about that. Some of us are old enough to remember when the Federal Aviation Administration went on strike under Ronald Reagan, so I'm really dating myself. And he fired 11,000 air traffic controllers. And this is a bit of a story to just give context to this. And with a great deal of insight, the leaders at the FAA realized they needed to do a better job of human resource management or human relations because they just fired 11,000 people. It was one of my early consulting experiences, and I went in and said, we need to revamp the human resource systems. And I remember being in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but talking about human resources and the need to revamp the way we lead so that the kind of management union relations were more positive and kept it a more even keel. At the break, somebody said, would you define human resources? And I thought, well, that's a great question. I've not been explicit. So I remember going into the men's room and going off by myself in one of the private places in the men's room and jotting down the definition of human resources. Human resources is the systematic integration of blah, blah, blah. Went back in, put it on the board, and everybody wrote it down. And a year or two later, and now 20 years later, I go into an FAA office, and our human resources are, and they put the definition I came up with in the men's room in Lawton, Oklahoma. That's scary to me. Anyway, what is leadership? And let me answer those together. Leader is the individual person who can corral resources to help get work done well. I just saw a great definition by Rick Mowdy, who it's not a published paper, and I was reviewing it. I think he said, leader, the definition of a leader is someone who has followers who corral resources to accomplish goals. Leader is focusing on the individual. Here's what I, as the individual, will do to lead my company. Leadership is focusing on the collective. It's not about me. It's about the depth of leadership within the company. So leader says, who am I? Leadership says, who are we? One of the fascinating things that could be done here, and I'm going to do a dangerous thing. I am going to create stuff. I have the luxury of doing this because we're on my laptop. So this is going to be a very dangerous move, and I know some of Susan and others are just cringing. One of the great discussions comes, that's not good. One of the great discussions comes from, well, I guess I can't do it. One of the great discussions comes from, I was trying to insert that. Let me go back to where we were. One of the great discussions comes from, here it is, work by John Cotter and Warren Bennis and others. They talk about leaders versus managers. And so what you sometimes have is you say, are you a leader or are you a manager? And I think that discussion is very good. So we say, here's somebody who says, I am a leader versus manager. So they say, not a manager, manager. Leader, non-leader. And they come up with a 2x2. So you have managers versus leaders. You're a manager you're not a manager, you're a leader, you're not a leader. We think our work takes that the next step. So we would agree with that framework, only now what we'd say, this is not manager, manager, we'd say inside to outside. And obviously I'm not doing this very well. So it's not just what you do inside, it's what you do outside with customers. Leader, low to high on leader. Now we're saying leader here to leadership. So it's not about the individual, it's about the leadership. And so when you see us drawing a chart, where is it? Oops, I'm going the wrong way. When you see us drawing a chart that combines those, leader to leadership is not just the individual, it's the collective. Inside to outside, this cell, competent leaders, is where you could have the leader-manager distinction. That's probably not very helpful, but I'll go back. Very simple. Leadership is the ability to build a depth of people in the company who can put resources together to get work done in an effective way. Leader is focusing on the individual who does that. Leadership is focusing on the collective. I'm going to give one other piece of data about why leadership is so important. It's interesting. The Academy Awards were last night, and it's an exception. How often in the Academy Awards does the person who wins the actor or actress of the year also win the movie of the year? Last night it happened with King's Speech. But when we go back in Academy history, it's about 20% of the time. 20% of the time, the outstanding individual is also part of the team that is successful as a collective. We thought, that's interesting. Let's look at sports. We looked at the World Cup. How often is the leading scorer in the World Cup, the one who scores the most goals, the Golden Boot, do they win the World Cup? And it's 20%. Basketball. How often is the leading scorer in the NBA or basketball league on the team that wins the championship? 20%. For some of us who follow Jimmy Fredette, that's discouraging because he's the leading scorer. It's unlikely they'll win the championship. It's 20% of the time. Hockey, any team sport, 20% of the time, the individual talent is good enough to help the collective team win. I think that's fascinating. As an aside, in the HR field today, in the human resource field today, I'm glossing, a lot of people say, let's not talk about human resources, let's talk about talent. It's all about talent. My argument is that's 20% right. 20% of the time, the best talent will win. 80% of the time, or a high percent of the time, more percent, the best team will win. And we know that there's been a lot done on leaders and the individuals. We want to focus on the collective leadership that pulls that together into a cohesive unit. So that's, Susan, more than you wanted to know about that distinction.
I have to say that I was a little nervous when you did put up the new slide, but you pulled it off, Dave. I'm enjoying watching
it's here.
that.
I can work with it now. Maybe.
I know, it worked. Hey, there's another question. Well, there's many questions that have come in, but one that has kind of a practitioner tone to it, but let me throw that one out. A question about, is there a 360-degree feedback instrument that you've created or used or recommend that really looks and measures that leadership code, those competencies that you discussed?
Yeah, we have a consulting firm. It should be on here somewhere. It's called www.rbl, and it stands for Results-Based Leadership, rbl.net. We have one. I'd be happy if you use ours. If you use a competence model, the only thing I'd encourage you to do is try to make sure that you have competencies in all 5 of these basic areas. Again, we love to, one of the first things we do when we go into clients who say, I want to build better leadership, we say, we actually have a 5-step process. The first step is, are people committed to doing this? Is there a real drive for leadership? And our test of that is, are senior line managers in the company willing to spend 20 to 30% of their time on this? We did a study called Top Companies for Leadership that was published in Fortune. In the companies that have the best ability to build leadership, their top team spends about a day a week on it. That is an enormous commitment. But without that commitment, it's going to be falderall. Second step is, do we have a good theory of leadership? Do we know what a good leader must know and do? And that's where this code model becomes important. Could we look at a company and say to that company, do you have competencies in each of these 5 areas? Now, you may not use our words, but do you have leaders who have to know where they're going, who have to have the discipline to get there, who have to work with their current employees, who nurture their future employees, and have incredible personal charisma and credibility? But then we say, if that's 60 to 70% of your competencies, do you also have 30 to 40% that really differentiate you, that say, here's who we are, who's different? Now, we have that model. We have the competency model that we've used. We have data sets on that. Others have similar models. So the answer is yes.
Thanks. There's another question that talked about, let me just read it. How do the challenges of the 21st century impact your perspective on what it takes to bring leadership today? I think you addressed part of that, but any other comments about that?
You bet. I love, again, I'm going to be guilty of simplifying. That's that taxonomy stuff. How do you take it complex? There's some wonderful groups doing studies of the nature of work. Linda Gratton, Gratton, Linda, Lynda, at the London Business School is doing a wonderful study of the future of work and the nature of work. There are 4 or 5 consortia I know of doing that. I think we can begin to see 6 trends that are shaping the nature of work, and they change the way we think about leadership. Let me just do them real quick. They stand for STEPPED. Social trends, the haves and the have-nots, the changing consumer demographics. What are the social things that we struggle with? The second is technological trends. We know that technology is moving from 1.0 to source information to 2.0 efficiency to connection, social networking, the whole connection things. E is economic trends, the first E. We know that there's some industries that are going up, some are going down. We have inflation, we have recession, we have granularity in the world in which we deal. The fourth one is clearly political trends. In the global economy right now, in the Mideast, you're seeing some major we are seeing major political uprisings and political shifting. In America, the regulatory world for health care, all those political pressures in the UK right now around managing government budgets. The second E, so I can remember these, are the environmental trends. Are we caring for the earth? Are we building sustainability? In fact, the next book we're writing is going to be called Leadership Sustainability. Sustainability is not just your carbon footprint or your philanthropy outside, it's how do leaders bring that inside. And then the D at the end for STEPPED is demographics. How do we deal with multiple generations of employees across the cycle? All of that obviously exists in a global context. Now, our belief, very simply, is that that setting changes what we expect of leaders. That leaders, it's not, if we were to do the old and the new, command and control. I'm in charge, I'm the leader. In the new, it's coach and collaborate. And the new, it's not just about me as the leader, it's about the leadership that I build. So those are the external drivers that we've seen, 6 of them, that are shifting us from a command and control to a coach and collaborate kind of leadership model.
Thank you. We probably just have a minute or so to take one more question. So let me give you one about leadership and followership. So here's a question from Paul. Is there a connection between leadership and followership somehow that allows those in non-leadership positions to exercise leadership the way that you've defined it?
Yeah, one of my favorite cartoons, and I think Steve Kerr gave it to me, it's a dog in front of a whole pack of dogs, and the little blurb says, the key to successful leadership is figuring out where everybody else wants to go. You get in front of these people and claim it was your idea. Now, I mean, leaders without followers aren't going to exist. Our definition of leader versus leadership picks that up. And let me just share some stuff we've been doing lately. And again, I love to create things. So this is a company. When we think about leadership within a company, I think there's 3 or 4 levels at which we think about it. One is at the very top level, for the chief executive or the chief officers of the company, there's a leadership challenge which is often around succession. How do you replace yourself with somebody who's more targeted for the future? Second, for the leadership cadre, the top leaders within a company, How do you build a cohesive group? And this is where leadership academies get built, and we've done that in our consulting. And how do you build a leadership group? Our rule of thumb is that's the square root of the number of employees within a company. So if a company has 100, you need 10. If a company has 1,000, you need 30. If a company has 10,000, you need 100. And you get that leadership leverage from the core group, plus or minus some. Then what we find is you have inside the company somewhere between 10 and 15% of what are often called your high potential employees. These are those that are positioned, and again, these are estimates. These are our future leaders, and they exist anywhere in that hierarchy. They don't have to be at the top or the bottom. They could be somebody coming in. We're doing work right now with a retail store. Those are often your store managers. This chain has thousands of stores. Their managers at the store level, many of them are that high potential. Our view of thumb is that the 10 to 15% probably should be spending 10 to 15% of their time getting nurtured for future leadership opportunities. And then finally, you have what you would call the followership, or the other 80% of the employees within the company, and they also should be touched by those leaders and have accountability for what they do. So we like to say leadership is about the very top leader, what we'll do to replace him or her, the top leadership cadre or team, the high potential future leaders throughout that hierarchy, and then 4, all of those who are followers within the organization who have the right to receive leadership and also are empowered to do leadership within their zone of accountability.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's time to conclude, but we sure appreciate it. An excellent job presenting, and I'm sure all of the listeners really enjoyed that. For those listeners, if you enjoyed today's webinar, I hope you will also be able to join us for future installments of the Leadership Perspectives webinar series. For example, there is one in May 18th, called The Power of Framing by Gail Fairhurst. There's others coming up as well. Again, thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful week.